Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Rooney, publisher of the Revelstoke Current, and welcome to In Conversation, our periodic discussion of political affairs. And my guest this week is Norm Macdonald, our MLA. Norm, welcome to Conversations.
Thank you. No, it's always a pleasure. And this is a beautiful setting. We're here at the bookstore, and which is very nice little courtyard here.
It is, and if you're unfamiliar with it, this is the courtyard at Castle Joe Books. And it's quite nice and autumnal. You know, there's surprising things here, which is kind of cool. But anyway, let's get on with it. Norm, you've just gone back to the Legends just resumed.
Yes.
So tell me, what's cooking down there in Victoria?
Well, it's nice. We have a fall session, so the last number of years we haven't. This year we're sitting from the beginning of October till the end of November, and for the opposition especially, it's an important opportunity to hold the government to account. So the first week, what we expected to see was the bill, the laws that would lay out the tax and royalty regime for liquefied natural gas industry, and it's something that was promised. In fact, it's a year late in coming, and it's something that we expected to see in the first week, and we haven't seen it. So what we did for the first week is basically respond to the throne speech, which is a bit of a time filler, really. So I did my speech, but we're all waiting for that LNG legislation. Now, the reason it didn't come in the first week is because it's being rewritten. So even though it's a year late, they're in the midst of rewriting it. And part of that, the reason for that is because when they shared it with some of the big energy companies such as Petronas, the Malaysian state-owned company, the company basically in a very public way said that LNG was not going to happen here unless everything was favorable. And
let me make that.
Sure.
Do a little interjection here. What Norm is talking about is the massive LNG project that was proposed for the coast, as opposed to the liquefied natural gas that Fortis is proposing to bring to Revelstoke to propane.
Yeah.
So for those of you viewers who are aware of the local initiative by Fortis, this is its bigger, more expensive, and probably much more controversial, bigger, older brother as an issue.
Yeah. So I mean, liquefied natural gas, it's used in many places, and it's coming here to Revelstoke, and I think that it's something with a long history. I think what's controversial about the provincial initiative is there's some questions still about the process of fracking, although that's something that's used worldwide, and anything that's controversial here would be controversial in other jurisdictions too. So that's one aspect of it. But the bigger part of it is that there were massive promises made by the BC Liberals and Critic in the last election that are going to be very difficult to actually meet. So what was promised in the last election was that there would be up to 15 liquefied natural gas plants. So the idea is, as the prices fell in North America, we have a tremendous reserve up in, particularly in the northeast of the province, to put that into pipelines, bring it to the coast, a lot of the either Kitimat or Prince Rupert, and then you would liquefy it, which you'd be taking it, I think it's negative 160 degrees Celsius. You use energy and liquefy it, and then you ship it to Asia. And the reason you would ship it to Asia is because while prices have fallen in North America, there was a period of time where they were quite a bit higher in China, Japan, Korea. So the BC Liberals in the last election promised 100,000 jobs. They promised to get rid of the debt, which sits at $68 billion right now, the provincial debt. They promised to create a $100 billion prosperity fund. They promised 12 to 15 plants, with the first one up by 2015. They, all of these promises were massive overswings, because they also promised that they would create a tax regime that was competitive worldwide, and they never would mesh. And I think, you know, during the election, that's part of what I said in the election, is that none of that actually made sense, and now we're at a place where the rubber hits the road, and they have to produce a tax regime that's going to produce, on one hand, revenue, and on the other hand, is going to be attractive to the industries that you know, to the companies that would invest. And I think that realistically, it's always something worth pursuing, but it was never going to be 100,000 jobs, and it was never going to be $100 billion or $1 trillion of economic activity.
It was oversold, and now we're
hugely oversold.
Now we're entering a period of, again, some economic uncertainty. I mean, you look at the TSX. I mean, it's been dropping. It's dropped over 100 points. There seems to be some signs of some stalling again in the United States. So we could be again in for some rough economic times.
Well, I think what was always dishonest about how it was presented was that the price here of natural gas in North America had undergone tremendous fluctuation. So 5 years ago, the Americans were building LNG plants to import liquefied natural gas, and then the ability to develop fields that they previously hadn't been able to meant that suddenly they had access to a huge supply. So it's not just British Columbia that's able to access natural gas, it's all of North America. And so the price fell dramatically. And so in a 5-year period, you had that collapse of pricing here, which meant that you would look for other markets. It was high in China, but it was just going to be there for a short period of time until the market caught up to that price differential. And so you have China with its own reserve untapped. You have Russia making a long-term deal to bring natural gas. You have other Central Asian countries with large supplies. You have Australia, United States developing their LNG. So the price structure's changed already. And to take natural gas here, liquefy it, and send it to China, it's questionable whether it would be profitable under the best circumstances.
Russia's a lot closer.
Russia's a lot closer. So the problem is there's two problems. I think first, it was dishonestly presented. The complication for BC is that now, as you negotiate with these companies, they know that the Liberals are under pressure to produce even one plant before the next election, and therefore to negotiate with them is very difficult. They don't need BC. They have plenty of areas that they can go to, and they're going to ask to be essentially subsidized. And so we could easily fall into a position where not only do we not get the $100 billion, that you could easily find yourself heavily subsidizing an industry that we were told we were going to reap tremendous benefits. So hugely oversold, it makes our ability to negotiate very difficult. Secondly, if government miscalculates on energy, there is a real cost. If you look at IPPs, if you look at the development of the private power under Campbell, that was aimed at an American market that he was told would emerge. And they used BC Hydro to enter into contracts that will cost BC Hydro $55 billion over the next 30 years, a significant amount of money. And of course, that market that Premier Campbell had been assured would be there disappeared. And so again, tied to natural gas prices, right? Because instead of using hydro that we produce, jurisdictions in the States can just use natural gas to augment their electrical needs when they have high power demands, right?
And then there are...
So we lose money when we sell hydro now, and we're buying it from IPPs for a lot more. And so when you miscalculate, when government miscalculates, it can be very expensive for us, and the politics of the BC Liberals needing to deliver on something where the economics of it no longer makes sense means that a government can make decisions for their short-term political needs rather than, you know, for the long-term benefit of British Columbia. It's a very dangerous situation to be.
Also, and then there are other technological developments. There's that coal-fired plant in Saskatchewan that uses carbon capture technology that's supposed to capture 98% of everything.
Right. Yes.
That's being proven now, so if that continues to work, then I could see where, you know, Edison in California, Pacific Gas and Electric could simply say, well, we have coal-fired plants, let's adopt this technology, and we don't have to change the whole shooting.
So that's going on, and you also have, like in Kimberley, I toured the Sun Mine, which is a solar energy facility, which is amazing. That's going to develop as well. I mean, we still have a ways to go before the economics are right, but solar energy is going to come on, turbine, wind power, different tidal powers, those are going to come in too. So it means that as a jurisdiction, British Columbia has to be really intelligent and smart, and the government has to be honest with citizens about what the realities are. So structure it so that things can happen and there's opportunities for energy developments. But I think we need to be informed accurately. It does us no good to be told that we're not going to pay sales tax, or there's $100 billion that we're going to have in an opportunity fund. It's like that's not. We're not starting from a point of reality. I just think it's a mistake.
Do you get the sense that they're putting all our eggs in one basket?
Absolutely. When I was the forestry critic, where there was a lack of capacity within the ministries responsible for the land base, and the capacity that they had was being directed to natural gas. You also had with mining the same thing that we're hearing, where they're putting everything towards natural gas. So like I say, if it was a definite and it was going to happen, that might be a sensible way to do things, but there's an awful lot to be gained from mining, doing it properly and paying attention to mining. There's an awful lot of untapped potential in forestry that you don't want to ignore. And then the idea of changing our education system to structured around liquefied natural gas. Okay, and there again, is it based on reality, or are you just doing this to make it, to again fool people for a longer period of time about what the reality is?
You spoke to yourself, you said our education system.
Oh no, the education system, they are restructuring. So they're going to the universities and they're saying that you have to produce people for the liquefied natural gas, because we're going to get 100,000 jobs, right? But when you actually look at how did you get that figure of 100,000, it's based upon
that they were actually doing that.
They are. So it's like you're reorganizing around something that isn't based upon any fact. So they'll go to a report by Ernst & Young, which is a credible company, and it gives you a figure of 100,000, but it's based upon, if you read it, then it says, based on the assumption there's going to be 15 LNG plants, which the government said, and based upon a multiplier that the government provided. So in the report it says, hey, we're not responsible for this. All we're saying is, if it's true there's 15, and if it's true this is the multiplier on jobs for every LNG plant, then you get to 100,000. But that's not a, it's not based, it's not credible really. And so that's the problem that we would have. But it'll be interesting. We will see the legislation at some point, but the fact that it didn't come out the first week means that they're rewriting it. And a year late, and you're rewriting the legislation because a Malaysian state-owned energy company has said no way, means that you've put yourself in the BC Liberals have put themselves in a very poor negotiating position, and it just doesn't feel like they are acting in a way that seems very intelligent. They're playing with the big boys, and it just doesn't feel like we have, we have positioned ourselves, that the province is going to come out ahead. So that's where we are.
Whoa, not a good place to be.
No, I think it's you know, it's unfortunate and somewhat predictable, but it has implications, of course, for every service the government provides.
Let's talk about another mineral issue that has implications for the government, I think, for people of BC, in particular those who are living in the north, and that's Mount Polley.
Yes.
Of course, and that seems to have sort of vanished in terms of news coverage, but I'm certain it's an ongoing concern, particularly for people up in the north.
Yeah, well, we raised, well, it should be, it actually impacts everyone in the province, because it makes projects, mining projects, where there is opportunity, although some mineral prices are coming down now and coal prices are coming down, but there's still huge opportunity with mining in the province, and it makes any future projects more complicated, because First Nations have an increased role in whether projects go ahead or not, and some of the projects that are being put forward have impacts on First Nations interests. So for the government to not be able to say that they can manage, that they can't honestly say that they're able to manage tailings ponds properly. There's been a massive failure, right? There's other mines that have implications for cross-boundary. So Alaska is basically saying, for that project, that we need to be assured that BC is a jurisdiction that can manage mining issues. And why would anyone believe that we can do that properly, given what happened at Mount Polley? And instead of getting to the bottom of it, the government has put in place investigations, many of them that just investigate themselves. So the Ministry of Mines investigates the Ministry of Mines. The Ministry of Environment investigates the Ministry of Environment. You do have a three-person panel that might be neutral, but their terms of reference are very narrow, and they look at the technical aspects of what went wrong there. But 25 million liters of water and sludge went into a pristine lake. Luckily, no one was hurt, but we have tailing ponds where people live below them. So it is something that on occasion happens. Since 2001, there's only been 22 worldwide tailing ponds that have failed. In BC, we have some closed mines. I think 2004 near Fort St. James, there was a failure. In Kimberley at Sullivan, there was a failure, but in 91. So it happens, but it shouldn't happen. At Mount Polley, there were all sorts of indications that there were a problem. The mines ministry approved a significant increase in the amount of mining that was to be done, knowing that the tailings pond wasn't big enough to handle that additional debris. They gave it a go-ahead. When the company said, okay, we then need permission from the Ministry of Environment to dump water, otherwise it will fill up. We can't do that. Well, the Ministry of Environment was asked for permission in 2010. They still had not given permission or said yes or no when the failure took place. So you had a 4-year period where they couldn't give them an answer, yes or no. And so it filled up and filled up. We know that the mine at Mount Polley, they were adding to the height of the diking. This is huge, by the way. Mount Polley, you know, for it to release 25 million liters, I mean, it's massive. The wall is 4 kilometers. It's a huge pond. To call it a pond is wrong, but they call it a tailings pond. It's massive, right? So they were adding to the height. The engineering company that originally designed it, Knight Piéhold, stepped away in 2010, said, we're not doing this anymore. You better have a look at how high you're making it. So that's a warning for the mines ministry. There were complaints about water lapping over the top of the dam. So the ministry said, well, it didn't lap over, but it was high. So nevertheless, there's talk about cracks And so there's all sorts of warnings, including the fact that you've increased capacity, knowing that you didn't have the capacity within the tailings pond. All sorts of warnings where pretty clearly the government fumbled it. And then their reaction to it is to do what they've done with so many other scandals. It's to just obfuscate and to hide behind these so-called these investigations. So they can't give us any information. Usually I can get briefed as the critic. They refuse, Bill Bennett had refused briefings. So at a briefing, if there's something that's going to compromise an investigation, they can say, I can't tell you that. But we can't even get the most basic information from the government. And it comes out in dribs and drabs. And when it does come out, it contradicts very often what we've been told. So we were told that we knew the number of inspections were half of what they were in 2001. So this is the government going to check to see if it's being looked after properly, if it's being managed properly, so that we don't have a failure like Mount Polley. There were half the number of inspections. So the answer to that, from the Premier and from the mines minister, Bill Bennett, was that, okay, there's half the number of inspections, but for the major mines, it's the same number of inspections, right? So that's what they said. That's what the Premier has said repeatedly. It's the same number as when the NDP was in. Now, we said, well, could you give us those numbers? You don't have to give us the reports, even though prior to 2002 they were publicly available. Mm-hmm. Okay, and other jurisdictions have them publicly available, as you think you would have. Okay, they argue that it interferes with the investigation to hand out some of this stuff. So, okay, fine, give us the numbers. What are the numbers? And they refused to do that up until just a few days ago. And then when you finally get the numbers, you find out how many geotechnical inspections were there in 2010? None. How many in 2011? None. So instead of, the 12 or 13 each mine should get every year across the province, there were none done for 2 years. So
no, that's criminal, really. So when you consider the kind of damage that the tailing pond failure causes, and they're very lucky that nobody's lost their life or gotten seriously ill, or that there hasn't been, perhaps there has been, we don't know, a major impact on spawning salmon.
We don't know, and first, that lake will never be the same. It is a huge lake and deep, but you can't remove the debris, really. I don't think practically you can remove it. So it sits there. It is naturally occurring rock, it's true, but it's been pulverized so that what you have in the tailings, which are supposed to be separated, are now at the bottom of the lake, and it's changed the lake. And okay, we were lucky no one was killed, but then it raises questions about other tailing ponds. Like I was in the Elk Valley, the beginning of, or the middle of September. We had, there's tailing ponds there where people live right below them. And people presume the government is going to do that job properly, right? We just presume it. Like here in Revelstoke, we live below dams that we presume there are people that are very smart to make sure that those have structural integrity, right? We presume they're built properly. We presume somebody's watching.
We've also got our fingers crossed because we're hoping that the Downey slide will never give way. Slide into the reservoir and then go over the top and drown everybody.
Yeah, but don't we all think that somebody's watching that, or we just presume that's what government does? Just like when you get in an elevator, we presume that there's inspectors that come and do that work to make sure it's done properly. We get on a plane, like all of these things, that's what government is expected to do. And to find that despite assurances that inspections were done, that in fact they weren't, first, that's not honest, and there should be a problem with that. And secondly, why would you not, what were you doing if not inspecting these tailing ponds? Like what were mine inspectors doing? Did we have nobody working, or what were they off doing? Now I have ideas about what they could have been doing instead. It's possible that they were dealing with other dams because we had a collapse in Oliver. Maybe they were sent to do something else. But all of it speaks to a lack of basic competence that's really disturbing.
That is very disturbing.
And with so many of these sorts of issues, the government has come away scot-free in the end and gotten away with it. And that's my concern with what's going on now, that they are going to go through and it will disappear from the public's mind and they will get away with it. And the problem with that is it reinforces behavior. And if you think back to, you know, the mill explosions at Burns Lake, now I was the critic with that, and I know that we did not effectively hold the government to account so that they fixed the problem. Because 3 months later, we had exactly the same thing happen at another mill. Yeah. And realistically, if the government is not forced to fix these problems, they happen again.
In fact, there's been another mill explosion in Burns Lake this past week.
Exactly. So you have to look at what's the inspection regime, what are the penalties when companies don't do what they're supposed to do, and the penalties have to be real. You know, that's the only way you modify behavior. You know, with the mines, between 2006 and 2012, these are multi-billion-dollar operations, right? There have been 6 penalties for mines, six fines for infractions under the Mines Act. 5 of them have been for less than $600.
But
so you don't modify behavior at all. It's like I say, it's people assume that this has been done properly. For the good of mining, it needs to be done properly. Otherwise, how do you get new mines started? Like, how do you go to Kamloops, where there is a tremendous deposit right beside Kamloops, right, that you want to develop? But how do you honestly say to people who live in Kamloops, don't worry, we do this properly in BC? Well, you cut corners, you allowed a tailings pond at Mount Polley to collapse. How do you now go to people in Kamloops and say, you know, trust your government, we'll look out for you, when they don't? So it's, you know, it's a penny wise and a pound foolish, to use a British phrase. You save money, I suppose, by not bothering to look after things, and you make mining companies who are major donors happy. But in terms of good public policy, it's appalling, really.
no, and the consequences, there will be financial consequences at some point, are going to be steep.
Exactly. And Mount Polley, okay, that lake is, you know, it's a beautiful lake, and you don't want to, you know, you don't want to exaggerate what has taken place, but it is not the lake it was. And there are other mines that sit right on, you know, like I say, close to where people live, or right on the Fraser. You want to develop them right on salmon-bearing streams that go through Alaska. Well, you've handed opponents of any development like that a tremendous weapon to go to the Alaskan government and say, how can you trust BC to do this properly?
Oh, and there are certainly people in this province or other provinces who are quite willing to do that.
Well, and First Nations too. You know, who are extremely protective of salmon-bearing streams. And how do you assure them that, you know, don't worry, we will make sure nothing happens to the salmon-bearing stream? Well, why would anyone believe that? And they're right not to. We just don't have a handle. But my fear is that the government will, as with so many things, get away with no consequences. And if that happens, I think you reinforce a behavior that's just not in the public interest.
Let's move on to another issue that is less well known, I think, by the members of the public, but I think is should be of somewhat equal concern, and that is the proposed changes to the Societies Act.
Yeah.
I think that I've read about this, and it's kind of frightening, really, that if you're a small, and this could apply to groups as large as something like Wild Site or North Columbia Environmental Society or the Hospice Society or the hospital auxiliary.
Yeah.
Somebody could say, hey, you're not operating public house.
Yeah.
Take the report.
So what the government has done is the provincial government has put out ideas about how they intend to change the Societies Act. So we haven't seen the legislation yet other than what's being proposed, right? But it's not in front of us yet. But it's anticipated that it will come in front of us in the form that we've seen. And basically what it does is it takes any not-for-profits, which include, of course, most of the prominent environmental groups, and it creates the ability for people to sue those groups on the basis that it's not acting in an apolitical way, right? Now the courts, we depend upon the courts to be logical about how they interpret that, but it's if people are familiar with the term slap suit, right? A slap suit isn't intended to be won or lost. It's usually something that an entity that has a lot of money uses to change the behavior of a group that has hardly any money. So, for instance, if the North Columbia Environmental Society is active in an issue that maybe they're against fracking and they're doing work here, they could be sued, and the entity that could be suing them could be a massive energy company that has the ability, the ability to pay for legal fees, and then you have the volunteer who gets the letter and worries about their house and about having to hire a lawyer, and it modifies behavior, and I think in an unhealthy way. I think that what we were talking about with liquefied natural gas, or a whole host of issues, the more informed people are, the more perspectives that are presented to them, the healthier the debate can be. And we should encourage that, right? Like
Well,
you should, and the Societies Act, I think, inevitably will be open to abuse. So it's poor legislation. People, I hope, will stand up. We should be having these democratic discussions.
One would hope so. Of course, the government would, if it got its way, could then pretend that there's nothing wrong in the Kingdom of BC.
Exactly.
Ever, because nobody speaks up. And
yeah.
That is, we've had a tendency that way
yeah.
in Canadian society for the last 100 years. You know, there are lots of things Canadians have not spoken up about.
Yeah.
Because government preferred that they did not speak up.
I think, like, we lived 6 years in Africa, and I think it's not even an ideological thing, left or right. There's governments, once they're in power, have this tendency to try to preserve that power and solidify it, and of course it's in their interest to to shut down any sort of debate. That's in their interest. So this allows government to do it, and I think, like I say, with other pieces of legislation that we've seen, if they're open to abuse, then especially by government, or in this case by corporations as well, if you take away an ordinary person's ability to participate, I think it's just bad legislation and needs to be opposed.
I agree. Let's talk about another kind of opposition, and this one fortunately was resolved, and that's the teacher strike.
Yeah.
That was, fortunately for all concerned, ended. Not quite as soon as it should have, but it was at least trending before it got any worse.
Yeah.
And I know there are lots of teachers who went through a lot of anxiety. I know my friend Susan was just out of her mind over this.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's a few things I would say. I don't think that I think teachers held their ground. I think the contract, the issues that they fought for are still there, right? There's still issues around resources going into classrooms. So I think that still exists, and we have to push government to put more resources into classrooms and deal with some of the issues that are still there. There's still a court case that I think was argued yesterday and will continue to sort of play out. Like my position in the strike, I went to all the lines, the strike lines. I wrote an article where I said I was 100% with the teachers. When asked in a number of elections about issues, I always made it clear exactly where I stood, and it wouldn't surprise. I mean, people know I'm a teacher. That's my background. I think the best gift you can give to a child is a good education, and I think the only fair way to do it is with a strong public education system. So I was 100% on the side of teachers in the dispute. I have to say I was really proud of a group that took a tremendous personal hit. They will never recover the money they lost in that dispute. You never get it back. Having said that, I think they taught a lesson to students in terms of standing up for what you believe, and regardless of the personal cost, which was significant, they stood up for what they felt was right. And even if people out there don't agree with the teacher's position, they clearly, honestly felt it was the right thing to do, and they stood up and accepted the consequences of standing up to a government. And the government, let's face it, in any of these disputes, they hold all the cards. They make money every day that the teachers are on strike, and they get to make the laws, right? So they do that all the time to the detriment of teachers. Often, well, as you know, they don't even stick to the Constitution of the country to make those laws, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, like I say, I was really proud to see people that I can still think of as colleagues, even though I've been doing this job for 10 years. I was really proud of them. They stood up, and they fought the good fight, and for the right reasons. I mean, if you've ever taught a class and you're in front of a group of students, you want the best for them, and for that to happen, you need good resources. Having said that, we still have a great system, right? I was in the school today teaching a group of, well, I wasn't teaching them, I was sort of the live politician to a grade 11 class, and just a fantastic group of kids, which gives you tremendous hope for the future in what is, and I've said this before, those are the two nicest schools in this province. So Revelstoke, you did something right in putting those two buildings together. They're beautiful, and like I say, when you see the kids, there's tons of hope. Bright young kids. So.
Well, that's a nice point on which to end.
Yeah. Well,
Norm,
it's a
thank you very much. It's
yeah,
always a pleasure having you
I
on
always
the program.
enjoy the opportunity. Yeah.
Good.
And thanks again for this setting.